Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, a full work week after what was a full weekend. Okay, fine, we'll do this. 'Tis the season, right? Between holiday parties and I'm a real estate agent, a residential realtor, so I had a lot of work to do Saturday. Then, of course, we had the Georgia-Texas game. Huge game, SEC championship, right? A lot on the line. Whether or not the beloved Georgia Bulldogs even get into the college football playoff. And then, if they did, where would they be seated? Would they get a bye? And of course, there's always the new kid on the block, the Texas Longhorns, new to the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, and them wanting to be the new big dog on the block. I know you don't want to listen to me talk about college sports or football or anything like that. I get that. This is not a sports podcast. But I want to draw an analogy to something that I just thought was kind of funny. Let me give you a little background, first of all. If you didn't watch the game, the Georgia-Texas game was a bit of a slugfest and more a defensive battle of wills than we've gotten used to in college football in recent years. Usually, a high-stakes game, especially in the SEC championship, where there's a lot on the line, the game has become a lot more offensive, meaning more points are being scored. And it's a bit of an oddity, I think, that we saw a 6-3 halftime score to begin with. But then I thought to myself at halftime, well, here's what's going to happen. This is going to be a 49-47 slugfest with a late field goal to win the game. And we'll all look back at halftime and go, how did we only have a 6-3 halftime score? The thing is, one team actually dominated the first half. The score wasn't really indicative of how dominant one team was over the other. One team had possession of the football for twice as much time as the other did. The team leading 6-3. So it made sense that they were leading, but what didn't make sense was by how much. It turns out that while Texas went into the locker room leading at the half 6-3, they also lapped their competition in penalties. While possessing the ball, a lot of their offensive linemen got called for a holding penalty, which means that they are literally using their hands to hold defenders back or pull them back from being able to get to the person holding the ball, whether it's the running back, whether it's the quarterback, preventing sacks. And so that's a 10-yard penalty. Referees are going to flag that. And you could see holding on just about every play anyway, but to some extent. But when it's obvious, when it's overt, they have to call the penalty. So Texas players were penalized a lot for holding. And honestly, going into halftime, I think the number of yards they had against them were more than the number of yards that the University of Georgia's offense had accrued on the field. That's how much Texas had been penalized, despite the fact that they moved the ball more. I mean, the statistics were just jarring. It was like a 4-to-1 yardage ratio. It was a 2-to-1 time of possession ratio. And going into halftime with the lead, the head coach of the Texas Longhorns, Steve Sarkisian, had this to say to the sideline reporter, Laura Rutledge, about the first half.
Coach, 8 penalties in this first half. How do you get your team to clean some of that up?
Well, hopefully they call them for a holding one of these times, too.
Let's go to Holly Rowe.
Laura was speechless. She didn't know what to say because it was kind of a not answer. I don't know jack squat about Laura Rutledge's background. I mean, I could sit here and pull up a Wikipedia. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. It spoke to me about the lack of training or permission. I don't know. She either didn't know to or isn't allowed to push back and tell Coach Steve Sarkisian some facts that sort of run afoul of his belief that his team was being unfairly penalized. Coach, your team possessed the ball for nearly 20 minutes, actually more than 20 minutes, of the full 30 minutes of the first half. So if Georgia doesn't get to possess the ball to be called for holding, how can the officials call them for holding? And again, Laura Rutledge didn't have that. She didn't have that in her arsenal, or if she did, isn't allowed to use it. she didn't get to push back and say, or wasn't allowed to, or chose not to say, were they guilty? Were those holding calls appropriate? Were your players guilty of those holding calls? None of. Again, it's a quick sideline Q&A, and they usually don't ask more than one question, and the coach gives an answer, and then they head into the locker room, and the coaches do their thing, and then we throw it to commercial, and we come back, and the pundits opine, and we come back and we play again. So Texas got penalized a lot, specifically in the first half. I think their second leading statistic, numbers-wise, like the quarterback had 300 and some yards. The next leading statistic wasn't like their wide receiver, their running back. It was penalties. They had nearly 100 yards in penalties. That's going to cost you. And it turns out the University of Georgia made some adjustments at halftime, came out, even with a backup quarterback, the stuff of legend. The backup quarterback, a guy named Gunner, comes in. You got to love that, right? A quarterback named Gunner. I mean, he was destined to become a quarterback, wasn't he? Anyway, the backup quarterback comes in. The team seems a little energized. The first really good play that he makes, which, by the way, he made with his feet, not with his arm. And suddenly Georgia scores a touchdown, and the game is completely changed. The outlook, the feel, it doesn't matter that the statistics were still overwhelmingly in Texas' favor. The mindset of the game changed, and they went back and forth. Georgia won in the end, and they're the SEC champs. And again, you didn't come here to hear me talk about football. I wanted to use that analogy, though, because it felt a lot like what our political discourse and our media spine gives us now when it comes to challenging distortions and lies and lies by omission, even from politicians and pundits. I watched the full interview between President-elect Donald Trump and Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, and I came away a little bit stunned that Laura Welker did a little Laura Rutledge throughout the Meet the Press interview yesterday. Didn't challenge the president-elect a lot on the lies, the distortions, the lies by omission, flat out misdeeds he's planning to perpetrate, built on lies and distortions and misinformation. Very little pushback. But I also, he's the president-elect. He's not running for office anymore. I also don't hear a whole lot of conversation about the rigged mainstream media and how unfair. That seems to have gone away too. Is there correlation between the change in tone on MSNBC's flagship morning show, Morning Joe, and NBC News getting the exclusive first interview with the president-elect for Meet the Press? I don't know. Judge for yourself. I'm just a little concerned that my Sunday morning anchors, specifically Lauren Welker, we'll start with her, are looking and sounding and acting more like sideline reporters who don't want to challenge an overheated coach heading into the locker room upset because he thinks the officials are being unfair to his team. So with that, we'll dive in.
You are the first president since Grover Cleveland to win non-consecutive terms. Mm-hmm. Republicans now have control of the House and the Senate.
Right.
What do you plan to accomplish in your first 100 days in office?
Well, we're going to do something with the border, and very strong, very powerful. That'll be our first signal, and the first signal to America that we're not playing games. We have people coming in by the millions, as you know, and a lot of people shouldn't be here. Most of them shouldn't be here, but we have jails being emptied into our country. We have mental institutions from all over the world being emptied into our country. So
we're not even a minute in, and we already have a lie. There's actually never been any corroboration from any agency in the United States or international agency that there is any evidence of prisons being emptied so that folks can come to the United States from other countries. The folks at PolitiFact and FactCheck.org, they've all dug into this and can't find any evidence of that whatsoever. But it's not about whether or not it's true. It's about whether or not it scares the shit out of somebody enough to vote for the man. And successful.
We'll be doing that. We're going to be extending within that period or as soon as we can the Trump tax cuts, because, they're coming due and they're very substantial for people. And
he's right. The individual tax cuts were set to expire in 2025. The corporate and business tax cuts that benefit the wealthiest 1%, however, were made permanent. Ask yourself why that is.
It would be I think it will anger a lot of people, frankly, if we don't get an extension of that. That's what led us to one of the greatest economies ever.
That was actually a bit of a sugar rush coming out of the Obama presidency. Obama's last 3 years, almost all economic indicators would tell you Obama's last 3 years were better than Trump's first 3 years, which are the 3 years that had nothing to do with the COVID pandemic.
And those two things are going to be very vital, very important. We're going to be focusing on crime in the cities, and we'll work with Democrat governors. Most of them are, as you know, if you look at the 25 worst places, they're just about all Democrat-controlled cities and states, and we're going to be working with Democrat governors and Democrat mayors, and I look forward to doing it, but we have to do something about crime, and mostly in our cities.
So here's the thing. Trump falsely claimed crime is at an all-time high, and that's nowhere close to true, according to CNN. Both violent crime and property crime rates have plummeted in the U.S. since the early 1990s and are far below all-time highs. FBI data shows that crime declined again in 2023 and has declined precipitously since the end of the pandemic.
And we're going to have a lot of other things. We'll be working on nominations. We're going to still be working on some nominations. I think they're going very well. We have, for the most part, I think they're going extremely well. It looks like Peter's doing well now. I mean, people were a little bit concerned. He's a young guy with
what's that got to do with anything?
A tremendous track record, actually. He went to Princeton and went to Harvard. He was a good student at both, but he loves the military, and I think people are starting to see it. So we'll be working on his nomination along with a lot of others.
Listen, I get this is like the first minute of this interview, and she's not supposed to just dive in and start being combative with him about all of these lies and distortions right off the bat, because she's got a full interview. She's got a full show with him, and he has stormed off the set of an interview before. So I get it. Kristen Welker has to walk on eggshells somewhat and not go in for the jugular right away. That being said, she didn't at all. At all. And that's what's so alarming. Can this country have 4 years of soft gloving this administration in this time, in this country, with what's going on around the world, with what's going on with our climate, with income disparities in this country, with healthcare outcomes? This is what we're going to get from our media with the incoming president-elect, the lyingest liar of all time in politics? Anyway, plenty more to dissect. The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. By the way, if you've wandered on to listening to The Ron Show, whether it's weekday mornings, 9 to 10, 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, or 11 to midnight at Progressive Voices, and you're thinking to yourself, I didn't catch the whole show. Good news, we podcast this bad boy on all the major podcast platforms. In fact, I've even gotten it on YouTube Music, which I was kind of, I guess, asleep at the switch. I didn't realize Google Podcast isn't a thing anymore, and now it's all YouTube Music. Okay, fine. We've gotten, I believe, all of those episodes finally uploaded all to YouTube Music. So thank you for listening, and know that in the back of your mind, if you're listening on one of the online radio platforms, you can always catch them in full at your preferred podcast platform. Back to dissecting Kristen Welker and Donald Trump's sit down on Meet the Press. Again, no challenging whatsoever in his opening spiel of lies, what he wants to do in his first day in office and first 100 days and blah, 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 blah. Just zero pushback. And I get it. You can't start an interview with someone that you're going to carry for an hour or longer and start by being combative right away. It's going to be an ugly show, poop flinging, you just can't do that. Okay, fine. I just didn't hear it throughout the rest of the interview either. Let's pick up where we left off.
We are going to delve into your nominations, but since you bring him up, do you still have confidence in Pete Hegseth?
Yes, I do. I really do. He's a very smart guy. I've known him through Fox, but I've known him for a long time.
Watching him on Fox.
And he's basically a military guy. I mean, every time I talk to him, all he wants to talk about is the military. He's a military guy. I used to kid him about it. I didn't think we'd be in this position where he may be, hopefully will be Secretary of Defense. But every time I was with him, he was fighting for soldiers, where he said some soldier was unjustly put in prison because they were really doing what they were taught to do, in some cases. So, I think he's going to do fine.
Did you hear that, by the way? Donald Trump even said to himself and Kristen Welker just now that he never dreamed he would be talking about a Pete Hegseth to lead the Department of Defense. He admitted that.
The fact that there are these allegations against him, misconduct, sexual misconduct, heavy drinking, the fact that he said to some senators reportedly he'll stop drinking if he gets this job. Yeah. Does that worry you?
No, I think that everybody has something that they can stop. Some people can stop eating. I'm lucky I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating. And we all want to stop doing something. And if he said that, I mean, it's a nice thing to say. That's a good thing to say.
Donald Trump comes from a family with past drinking histories, which is why he doesn't drink. And Kristen Welker touches on that in a little bit. But you would think that he would also come away with the knowledge that someone who is a problem drinker saying, I can quit at any time, is lying to you. Just to placate you, just to get you off of their back, just to get you to stop questioning them and their drinking problem. No, he can't just quit anytime. And when has Donald Trump ever stopped eating? Look at the man.
But he's very respected. I can tell you, I know a lot of the people at Fox, they think he's fantastic.
About the Pentagon.
And the people that work with him, really, they love him.
A lot of us have people that love us, that work with us. It doesn't make him qualified. I didn't hear anything that makes him qualified. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know a lot about Pete Hegseth, except that his coworkers apparently like him, although a lot of his coworkers understand that he also has a drinking problem and have gone on the record in saying so. But I didn't hear anything that screams resume outside of he can't go back to television now because look what's happened to him. Well, what's happened to him has happened because of his past antics. This is not, he's not a victim. God, we got to stop with the victimization of people who bring this on themselves. Hunter Biden brought a lot of this on himself, right? Right? How is Pete Hegseth any different for being scrutinized in such a way?
All right, we're going to delve into your cabinet picks a little bit later, but I want to delve into one of your signature promises on the campaign trail, which was to end inflation, to lower prices. You are now proposing tariffs against the United States' three biggest trading partners. Economists of all stripes say that ultimately consumers pay the price of tariffs.
I don't believe
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
Awkward silence.
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow. But I can say that if you look at just pre-COVID, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country.
Nope.
And I had a lot of tariffs on a lot of different countries, but in particular China. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars, and we had no inflation. In fact, when I handed it over, they didn't have inflation for a year and a half. They went almost 2 years just based on what I had created. And then they created inflation with energy and with spending too much. So
the folks at CNN fact-checking this. Cumulative inflation during Trump's presidency was at about 8%. He also falsely claimed that inflation was so low during his presidency that the Biden administration didn't have inflation for a year and a half. He said basically they went 2 years just based on what I'd created. In reality, there was cumulative inflation of about 14% over Joe Biden's first 2 years as president. The Biden era peak for month-over-month inflation, 9.1%, occurred in June of 2022 during those first 2 years. But pesky facts.
I think we will. I'm a big believer in tariffs. I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich. We're subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. We're subsidizing Mexico for almost $300 billion. We shouldn't be subsidizing. Why are we subsidizing these countries? If we're going to subsidize them, let it become a state. We're subsidizing Mexico, and we're subsidizing Canada, and we're subsidizing many countries all over the world. And all I want to do is I want to have a level, fast, but fair playing field.
Sir, your previous tariffs during your first administration cost Americans some $80 billion, and now you have major companies from Walmart, Black & Decker, AutoZone, saying that any tariffs are going to force them to drive up prices for their consumers. Okay. How do you make sure that these CEOs, that these companies don't, in fact, pass on the cost of tariffs to their consumers?
Yeah. They cost Americans nothing.
Nothing. He says nothing. Study after study, according to CNN, including one from the federal government's bipartisan U.S. International Trade Commission, found that Americans bore almost the entire cost of Trump's tariffs on Chinese products. The tariffs are paid by U.S. importers, not foreign exporters, as Trump regularly claims, and it's easy to find specific examples of companies that passed along the cost of the tariffs to U.S. consumers. Not nothing, sir. Not nothing. Kristen, step up.
They made a great economy for us. They also solve another problem. If we were going to have problems having to do with wars and having to do with other things, tariffs, I have stopped wars with tariffs by saying, you guys want to fight, it's great, but both of you are going to pay tariffs to the United States at 100%. And they have many purposes, tariffs, if properly used. I don't say you use them like a madman. I say properly used. But it didn't cost this country anything. It made this country money, and we never really got the chance to go all out because we had to fight COVID in the last part, and we did it very successfully. And when I handed it over to Biden, the stock market was higher than what it was just previous to COVID coming in. It was actually higher.
All right, I got to fact check that, but I also got to take a quick hard break here. The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Call or text The Ron Show anytime at 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So naturally, in his first network televised interview since winning the presidency again, Donald Trump sat down with Kristen Welker, Meet the Press, and, I had high hopes for her when she took over for Chuck Todd. I'd grown really weary of Chuck and the both sidesism, but I think that's got more to do with just where the journalistic culture is in this country. It's all corporate driven now, and there is again, you can tell this specifically within NBC, with MSNBC's Morning Joe now sort of capitulating and backing off and taking a softer tone towards the incoming administration and the issues that they have going in when they're not even in office yet. And now you have Kristen Welker, who just sat back and let Donald Trump spew a ton of lies without a whole lot of pushback. It was a little alarming, a little concerning. And I guess I can at least be happy to see that the fine folks at CNN, who have like almost no viewers whatsoever, MSN, CNN, they have all suffered miserable, hemorrhaging losses. And I don't think it's so much about the American people saying, well, Fox News is decidedly the more fact-based. No, I just think that those of us who don't buy into Fox News or don't buy into talk radio, who are not part of that conservative mind virus, we've given up on mainstream media being a fair arbiter. And yesterday's interview with Meet the Press doesn't do NBC News, Kristen Welker, or this mainstream media any favors. Let's pick up where we left off.
Tariffs are properly used, are a very powerful tool, not only economically, but also for getting other things outside of economics.
Yeah, he said something about keeping two countries from going to war with each other. Sir, which two countries?
Well, again, prices did go up on some goods in your first administration, washing machines, tires. Will you punish CEOs?
Let me just explain to you. No. You mentioned washing machines. So you look at Whirlpool in Ohio. I got a call from Jim Jordan, one of the greats, congressman from Ohio. And he said, they're going out of business because South Korea and China are dumping washing machines into our country. And I put a 50% tariff on the washing machines coming in from China and South Korea. And Whirlpool and the companies that made washing machines, which are based in Ohio, largely based in Ohio, went through the roof. We saved thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs. They were all going out of business because they were dumping washing machines. And when I put the tariffs on, they became successful businesses. No, it didn't. Not only didn't it cost people, it made our country stronger and more powerful, and it kept jobs.
Actually, that Whirlpool plant he's talking about, it had closed for a while in the closing days of his presidency, and actually reopened in 2022 when he wasn't president. Just got to point that out.
But how do you make sure that consumers don't wind up paying more? Will you punish CEOs who try to pass the cost of tariffs onto their customers?
Well, the market's going to take care of it. I mean, actually, the market takes care of it. And if it doesn't, we adjust it somewhat. But in the case of Whirlpool, or let's say companies that made washing machines, they were all being put out of business by the dumping from, in particular, South Korea and China. And when I put the tariffs on, very substantial tariffs, although peanuts compared to what people do to us, what countries do to us, it became a very, very powerful, successful company. Now, let's say I didn't do the tariffs. It would have gone out of business. You would have lost tens of thousands of jobs, and you don't include that in your equation. No, they make
did
a
lose
lot of
jobs.
money. I'll go a step further. Tariffs are going to make our country rich. Tariffs are going to help us pay off $35 trillion in debt.
Oh, God.
Tariffs are going to make our country safe because China, as an example, doesn't want to play games with us if we're going to do tariffs on them. They don't want to play games. And we have a lot of games being played on us right now.
Well, I think, and that takes me to my next question.
Yeah.
Are you actually going to impose these tariffs, or are they a negotiating tactic?
Well, I'll give you an example. With Canada, and in particular Mexico, we have millions of people pouring into our country. You agree with that. I spoke with I spoke with Justin Trudeau. In fact, he flew to Mar-a-Lago within about 15 seconds after the call ended. Yeah. He was at Mar-a-Lago. We were having dinner talking about it. I said, you have to close up your borders because they're coming in the northern border, too, a lot. Not like the southern border, but they're coming in the Canadian border a lot. And drugs are pouring in. Almost as importantly, drugs are pouring in, maybe more importantly.
And, it's on that note, the man has openly talked about sending our U.S. military into Mexico to fight with drug cartels, right? Into another sovereign country to fight with drug cartels. We could instead be investing in ending drug addiction in this country and saving lives domestically and not expending lives on foreign land. Not just their lives, our lives. Why is it investing in ourselves and ending drug addiction issues in this? Why is that so hard to do? It's a complicated fix, right? It's a complicated problem. And going in with guns and shooting at people or dropping bombs on, I don't know, drug cartel camps in Mexican territory, somehow easier. It doesn't solve the drug crisis, though. And by the way, most of the fentanyl that comes into this country comes in on the backs of U.S. citizens returning from other parts of the world. But again, facts.
Drugs are pouring in at levels never seen before, 10 times what we had. They're just pouring in. We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%. That's a very substantial tariff. And in both cases, but in the case where it was really visible, within 10 minutes after that phone call, we noticed that the people coming across the border, the southern border, having to do with Mexico, they were at a trickle, just a trickle. It was, in fact, I call the border. See, unlike my opponent, I do call the border a lot. And I said, how's the border looking today? They said, there's nobody here. They couldn't believe it.
What he fails to mention, and Kirsten Welker doesn't push back on, is that there has been a sharp decline in border crossings since December of 2023. Sharp drop, which has nothing to do with him having a conversation with the Mexican president or Justin Trudeau from Canada. It has everything to do with a change in Biden policy, which, listen, those of us on the left, we'd say, you know what? He tried for 3 years to get Republicans to play along. He had a bipartisan agreement on the table in the spring of 2024, when actually there were already signs of a sharp decline in border crossings. And yet he couldn't even get that bipartisan deal done. I'm talking about Joe Biden, because Donald Trump stepped in and says, no, I don't need you to sign that, because if you fix this problem, I can't run on this problem. Again, very little pushback from Kristen Welker on any of this, though. By the way, listen to this unsubstantiated whopper.
And the other thing I told them is no more drugs. And I told that to China, too. I had a deal with President Xi. Had the election
Are you listening to this?
been different, I'm going to be very nice because we don't have to get into an argument over 2020.
There's no argument.
But had the election been different, the result been different, we would have had China giving the maximum penalty, which is the penalty of death, to people that sent fentanyl into this country. But Biden didn't unfortunately, finish that discussion up. I had an agreement with President Xi, who I got along with very well. We've had communication as recently as this week. And I had communication with him where they were going to give the death penalty to anybody sending drugs into the United States.
This week you had that conversation.
Not that conversation, but I had other conversations. Okay. But in the past, I've had that conversation.
So here's where a responsible journalist would say, yes, sir, but because there wasn't a peaceful transition of power, even if you did have that conversation with President Xi, and really you're just saying it, there's no proof of it, you don't have proof of it, you haven't provided any proof of it, even if you were having that conversation with President Xi before the transition of power that wasn't peaceful, if you had had a peaceful transition of power, you'd have been informing the incoming Biden administration of those conversations, and they could have picked up right where you left off. But there was no peaceful transition of power. So isn't that also your fault, sir? Again, though, there was no pushback.
Let me ask you about another aspect of the economy, sir, the minimum wage. The federal minimum wage has been $7.25 since 2009.
Finally.
There are 20 states that still have the federal minimum wage at $7.25. And I actually have a map. 19 of these states actually voted for you, sir.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you can see it
Yeah.
right here. I don't know if you remember this, but during the debate in 2020, I asked you if you would raise the minimum wage. You said you would consider it. And so my question for you is, now that you are going back to the White House, for these 19 states that voted for you, are you going to raise the federal
minimum wage? It's a very low number. I will agree. It's a very low number. Let me give you the downside, though. Yeah. In California, they raised it up to a very high number. And your restaurants are going out of business all over the place.
Yeah, okay, but Kristen Welker wasn't asking about the maximum minimum wage. She was asking about the minimum wage, which you agreed is a very low number. So why don't we just address the minimum wage instead of worrying about what states who go above that are doing? And by the way, restaurants are closing across the country, period, because chain restaurants are just not... Millennials are killing chain restaurants. I hate to tell you, millennials are killing chain restaurants because they're just not feeling Applebee's and TGI Fridays. I mean, Bennigan's doesn't exist anymore for a reason because it's just like TGI Fridays or Applebee's, and we're just not feeling chain restaurants anymore. Not the chain restaurants even pay $7.25 an hour because they pay their service staff $2.13 an hour, and then we pay the tips. So what does that have anything to do with the question that you agreed is an issue, that the minimum wage in 20 states, 19 of them which are Trump states, is too low a number? You agreed to that. So just focus on that, sir.
The population is shrinking. It's had a very negative impact. But there is a level at which you could do it, absolutely. Yeah.
What is that level, do you
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I can say this. You have a lot of businesses that are open and thriving because of the lower minimum wage. If you raise it too much, and you understand this, if California went crazy. They went crazy. And people, the restaurants are closing all over. Many more people are hurt.
California's minimum wage, by the way, is $16 an hour, and for fast food employees, it's $20 an hour. He's talking about fast food restaurants. He's not talking about fine dining, sit-down restaurants, because they actually do pay professional chefs and sommeliers. They pay them pretty well. No, he's talking about fast food restaurants. I'm using air quotes because they're not restaurants. They're just fast food establishments. We all know the love of McDonald's, fries, and that guy, and Big Macs, and Diet Coke. He's talking about fast food employees making $20 an hour. And yeah, okay, so those jobs may actually be dwindling. We could use less fast food in this country, could we not?
So I hear you saying, similarly to sort of what you said in 2020, will you consider? Is this something you're going to look at?
I'd want to speak to the governors. And the other thing that's very complicated about minimum wages is places are so different. Mississippi and Alabama and great places are very different than New York or California. I mean, in terms of the cost of living and other things.
Okay, so he's not wrong, but does he not understand does the man not understand what the term minimum, federal minimum, does he not understand what those two words mean? That would be the federal minimum wage. You can't sit here and tell me that $7.25 in 2009 in Mississippi is the same as $7.25 in 2024 in Mississippi. That doesn't add. It's still, you set a federal minimum wage that businesses would have to adhere to. And man, listen, I'm trying to help you out here. You're actually kind of cracking the door to doing something that would be the right thing to do for this economy. And you can even, I don't know, maybe provide tax cuts to businesses that sort of erode over time. Oh, God, tax cuts to businesses, they don't erode over time with Donald Trump. But that's what should happen. Raise the minimum wage, offer a tax cut to small businesses, legitimate small businesses. That'll offset the increase in the minimum wage. It just disappears over time because that's the cost of doing business, and businesses should be run by people who understand that that is the cost of doing business, and they have to absorb that somehow, even if the assistance to do so starts to wither away over time.
So it would be nice to have just a minimum wage for the whole country, but it wouldn't work because you have places where it's very inexpensive to live, where a minimum wage, which is at $8 or $9, might have very little effect, because the cost of living in certain places is really low.
So again, where the campaign rhetoric doesn't meet the rubber on the road here. This is one of the, you can't sit here and tell us for 2 years that you're running for office how crazy expensive it is to live in this country and then say, well, prices really haven't changed all that much since we raised the minimum wage in 2009. That's been 15 years, sir. Costs have gone up everywhere, right? That's what you said on the campaign trail. Come on, man, follow through. This is an opportunity for the incoming Trump administration and the GOP to do something Democrats have actually been sort of timid to even bring up for discussion the last 4 years because of the economic headwinds and the cost of inflation, and knowing that that is going to impact inflation and impact small businesses as well. This is an opportunity to do something that has been a progressive wish list item for a long, Bernie Sanders, right? And to steal some of their thunder.
Before we move on to immigration, which I do want to talk about, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
No,
you don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
All right, so gird your loins. I have one more segment, and we're going to have to dive into a second day of this, dissecting the Trump-Kristen Welker interview on tomorrow's Ron Show as well. So be ready for that. I'll be mentally prepared for it as well. Anyway, she is going to transition into immigration, mass deportation, and we got a lot to talk about there. When the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. Follow the Ron Show, by the way, on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL. All right, final segment of today's Ron Show, and this is sort of a part one of a two-part because this Kristen Welker interview with Donald Trump went way long, and there's a lot to cover. So with that, let's pivot right to where she leads into immigration.
Let's talk about mass deportation, one of your big agenda items. You've talked about prioritizing people who have criminal histories.
Correct.
But is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do. But you have to have, you have rules, regulations, laws. They came in illegally. The people that have been treated very unfairly are the people that have been online for 10 years to come into the country. And we're going to make it very easy for people to come in terms of they have to pass the test. They have to be able to tell you what the Statue of Liberty is. They have to tell you a little bit about our country. They have to love our country. They can't come out of prisons. We don't want people that are in for murder.
Okay,
so we had 11,000 and 13,000 different estimates, 13,099 murderers released into our country over the last 3 years.
Nope. Back to CNN. In reality, the Department of Homeland Security and independent experts have noted that official figure is about immigrants, homicide convictions in the U.S. today who entered the country over decades, including during Trump's own administration, not over the past 3 years of solely under the Biden administration. I'll give Kristen Welker, she did correct him on that and then wilted like a flower when he just continued to push the narrative that was not a falsehood on his part.
They're walking down the streets. They're walking next to you and your family, and they're very dangerous.
The 13,000 figure, I think, goes back about 40 years.
No, it doesn't. No,
That
it's within the 3-year
13,000
period. It's
figure.
during the Biden term. No, that was a fiction that they put that out. This was done by the Border Patrol. It's 13,099, and it's during the Biden period of time. And these are murderers, many of whom murdered more than one person. You don't want those people in this country.
Welker usually does this thing where she corrects the distortion and then moves on without giving the person she's interviewing the opportunity to correct that. She did not even do that with Donald Trump on this case,
But
though.
you're saying something, sir, that's significant. I just want to make sure I'm clear, which is that you're saying, yes, you're going to focus on the people with criminal histories, but everyone who's here illegally has to go.
I'm saying this. We have to get the criminals out of our country. We have to get people that were taken out of mental institutions and put them back into their mental institution, no matter what country it is. Do you know that Venezuela, their prisons are
This is a lie.
at the lowest point in terms of emptiness that they've ever been? They're taking their people out of those prisons by the thousands, and they're drunk. And just to get back, because I know exactly what you're getting at. Number one, we're doing criminals, and we're going to do them really rapidly. We're getting the worst gang probably with MS-13, and the Venezuelan gangs are the worst in the world. They're vicious, violent people. And you see what they've done in Colorado and other places. They're taking over, literally taking over apartment complexes and doing it with impunity. They don't care. They couldn't. They just are. They're in the real estate business.
You know, the local police say they're not.
Okay.
That is not the case in Colorado.
Oh, it's totally the case. I mean, I have it
you
on
don't
tape.
believe the local police.
I play it. I used to play it at my rallies every single night. No,
Exactly.
They're breaking into doors. They're taking over the building.
But sir, you
and by the
raised
way, the
point.
police are afraid to do anything.
You raised the
Right.
point that the logistics are complicated. You said
Sure
it
they
yourself.
are,
You would
but
need
everything's
24
complicated.
Yeah, I mean, you need 24 times more ICE detention capacity just to deport 1 million people per year, not to mention more agents, more judges, more planes. Is it realistic to deport everyone who's
You have
here
no
illegally?
choice.
No.
First of all, they're costing us a fortune.
And that's not true either. I don't know who this us is he's talking about, but it's not the American taxpayer, because if they have secured a Social Security number to contribute to Medicare and Social Security, benefits that they know they'll never derive back, even if they do hit 65 and stay in these United States, that's actually a contribution to our social safety net that they'll never derive. That's just coming back to us. Any other consumption-based tax, they are actually contributing. Even property taxes at the local level. If they rent something, that property tax isn't just a cost that the landlord's eating. No, they're passing that on to the person renting the place. That would be the undocumented immigrant.
But we're starting with the criminals.
Listen
and
here.
we got to do it. And then we're starting with others. And we're going to see how it goes.
Who are the others?
See how it goes.
Others are other people outside of criminals. We have convicted murders. We don't mean people that are even on trial. We have people that have murdered numerous people are on our streets and in our farms.
What the ever-loving hell is he talking about? That is inflammatory rhetoric. It is divisive and it is dangerous.
And we have to get them out of our country.
What about dreamers, sir?
Lean in
Dreamers who
here.
were brought to this country illegally as children. You said once back in 2017, they, quote, shouldn't be very worried about being deported. Should they be worried now?
The dreamers are going to come later, and we have to do something about the dreamers.
Later.
Because these are people that have been brought here at a very young age, and many of these are middle-aged people now. They don't even speak the language of their country. And
He's
yes,
right.
we're going to
He's
do
right.
something about the
What does
dreamers.
that mean?
And
What are you going to do?
I
Why
will work
later?
with the Democrats on a plan, and if we can come up with a plan, but the Democrats have made it very, very difficult to do anything. Republicans are very open to the dreamers. The dreamers,
Really?
we're talking many years ago, they were brought into this country, many years ago. Some of them are no longer young people, and in many cases, they become successful. They have great jobs. In some cases, they have small businesses. Some cases, they might have large businesses. And we're going to have to do something with them.
Holy shit.
And
You want them to be able to stay. That's what you're saying?
I do. I want to be able to work something out. And it should have been able to be worked out over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, he leaves out the fact that he had been president himself and that Nancy Pelosi went on record in 2017 and said that Donald Trump would have signed the DREAM Act. He never did. He also leaves out the fact that there was actually a House bill that Pelosi passed in 2021 that died on an evenly divided Senate because of the filibuster. He also leaves out the fact that even when he and his party had the House and the Senate and the White House early in his administration, that they couldn't get their own caucus to come to an agreement on dealing with the Dreamers in a positive way. But yeah, let's look at the last few years, which has been something of a show with the likes of Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and fighting over the border and fentanyl. Please.
And it never got worked out. You know, Biden could have done it because he controlled, Congress to a certain extent, right? He could have done something, but they didn't do it. I never understood why, because they always seem to want to do it, but then when it comes down to it, they don't. I think we can work with the Democrats and work something out.
This is one of those scenarios where they need to hold him to his word. Elizabeth Warren went on record a couple of weeks ago in a piece and said, yeah, anything that he is populist about and campaigned on in a progressive manner, hold him to it. That's part one of our review of the Kristen Welker Meet the Press interview with President Donald Trump. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 to midnight, Progressive Voices, or wherever you podcast. Have yourselves a great one. We'll see you tomorrow.